This is a very poignant and all ever fascinating subject, how Judas could fall. Yogananda, he was one of the 12 apostles. Yogananda said that he was a prophet. And I was so surprised when he told me that. He said, oh yes, he had to be one of those 12. But then why did he fall? How is it possible to rise so high and fall? I have used an illustration of Masters many times of the individual soul as related to God. It's a very interesting illustration. He said, take a gas jet, jets of gas on a stove, and each individual little jet of gas that's producing a flame seems individual, but it's not individual. It's really only a manifestation of the same gas that's flowing underneath. Now, in Christian theology, you find a complete disagreement with the Hindu and Buddhist theology, which is that God is our very self. He is the true self. This is the false and egoic self. And the Christian theologians say God is wholly other. Well, let's explain it in this way. Supposing that stove, the gas flowing in that stove, were conscious. In one way, that consciousness flowing upward and producing the flames. But if you direct that flow backwards, if you direct that consciousness backwards, what you're seeing is the one gas underneath, not the individuals. If you look at each individual jet, it seems like a separate flame. You can even change the color of it, change the size of it, have a larger opening, put a filter over it, put some little sulfur or whatever into the flame. It'll burn a different color. It can look infinitely varied, but if you go backward, you see that it's the same jet that it's coming from, the same gas flow. Well, this is the soul in relation to God and in relation to the ego. The ego is really the same self directed away, directed into a particular individual jet, and it thinks of itself as individual because it becomes identified with that particular expression. But that expression is not our true self. You could not be separate from that because that is all there ever was. God couldn't create the universe the way a carpenter might create a table. There was nothing else to create it out of except his own consciousness. And so what he had to do was produce out of his conscissness the dream of creation, the dream of the universe. Everything exists in consciousness. At the beginning of the 20th century, this fact began to be understood when it was realized that matter is really only a vibration of energy. And Sir James Jeans and other great physicists began to suspect what they called that God is what they called mind stuff, that the whole universe is mind stuff, that it's really something created in the mind. How is it possible that this world, which seems so real, so solid, how can it be that? Well, we can hardly understand with our rational minds, just viewing through our senses, how this chair that you're sitting on isn't horribly hard. Hope it's not too hard. You can't think that this body is not something solid. Do you know that if you were to take out the space from between the atoms in your body, there would be so little left of matter that quite possibly you wouldn't even be able to see it. It would be a little speck of dust. As far as the nearest star is from us, 4 light years, that's 186 miles a second, 1,000 miles a second, times 4 years is how far away the nearest star is. That, relatively speaking, is how far away the atoms are in your body. It looks solid, but it's not so at all. And even that seemingly solid atom is not solid, it's just energy. And that energy is really just a manifestation of the infinite consciousness, the ideas of God. All of this is a dream. Now, when our energy flows into that little jet that becomes our ego, when it takes on that little projection of separate seeming, it seems like a very real reality because we build up this personal dream around it. And we think, well, I want this and I own that and I have that. All of these are just figments of our imagination. But the thing is that the more our energy goes that way, the more difficult it is to remember. Now, a gas jet is something unconscious. I've suggested consciousness, but it's more than consciousness. It's bliss. And the reason we can enjoy this world is that that bliss that's God comes up through our being and manifests itself as tastes, sounds, pleasures. And we think that we're going to find what we're looking for the more we explore those pleasures. We don't find them for the simple reason that the real pleasure we're getting is from behind us, not outside. It's all so complex and yet so simple. But what you get with somebody like Judas is just what happens in the life of anybody who's trying to find what his reality is. He's told that God is within. But his experience of life is that everything he knows is outside. He goes out and sees a beautiful scene, has a beautiful experience, whatever it is, he thinks that's where it is. The truth is it's he who's giving it the joy and the sense of beauty. You would not have anything if there were not that consciousness there. Why is one person's meat another one's poison, as the saying goes? Quite simply because it's our own ideas that we project onto things. I remember a meal that I had in a friend's house in Germany. It was a little community that had invited me to come and speak there. Very nice people, but horrible German cooking. I'm sorry if you're German. I have to say that they brought this slop out, and everybody was licking his chops. Oh, good, oh, good. I could hardly get the stuff down. I mean, I had to be polite, so I did my best. But they loved it. I didn't. Does that mean it was good or it wasn't good? No, we gave that sense of pleasure or displeasure to that food. We decide what we like. We satisfy that idea in our own minds, and so we feel that that idea is satisfied and we feel happy. That's what happiness is all about. People think that they're happy if they get a lot of money, and so they get a lot of money. I went into, I enjoy P.G. Wodehouse books. I have about all of them. And I went into a shop in London recently, and I saw that they advertised P.G. Wodehouse, so I thought, well, let me go in and see if they have any that I might not have. I found all these priceless first editions, £368. That's something like $800. And or maybe less, but a lot of money for just one first edition. But a lot of people get fascinated by things in their minds. If I were so fascinated with P.G. Wodehouse that I just wanted to own those first editions, well, I'd be out of pocket a lot of money. There are a lot of books he wrote. But some people will get all excited because they're golfing enthusiasts and somebody's selling the pair of knickerbockers or whatever that Bobby Jones was wearing when he won a particular championship. And a millionaire will trade railways to get that pair of knickerbockers. This is really from a P.G. Wodehouse story. I don't know that it's really true, but it's an example of the mania that people will develop in thinking that they've got to have this or got to have that. It's all in the mind. Now, once you get onto the spiritual path and you understand that the truth is not out there in the sense it's in God, that it's really been God all these lives that we've been seeking, only God, the bliss of the soul. We understand that. But that ego doesn't let you go all that easily. And so it is that I would see fellow disciples of mine too, who would somehow hold back a little part of themselves. Well, I'll tell you, I'll make a confession to you. If I'm a good teacher, and I don't know that I am, but if I am, or to the extent that I am, it's because I've been through it all already. All the doubts that anybody could have, I've had. And I know, unfortunately, that in past lives I was full of those doubts. Master said so. What's good about it is that I've resolved them. I don't have them anymore. But while you've got them, you look at the guru and you think, well, I don't know if he's right. Maybe. But I got to have my own opinion too. And so the ego comes in. And as a result of that, you don't completely find it. And you stumble. You know Paul Brunton, when he met Ramana Maharshi, he wrote in a very good book of his called A Search in Secret India. If you haven't read it, you'd enjoy reading it. But he met Ramana Maharshi and accepted him as his guru. And he achieved, and this is what you don't get from the book, because he wrote the book as if he were just a sort of a journalist. But in fact, he was a serious devotee. And he achieved Sabikalpa Samadhi. But while there's even that level of Samadhi where you go into ecstasy, into oneness with God, but you don't bring that consciousness back with you in what Yogananda called Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And you can still, after Sabikalpa Samadhi, when you come back to the ego, you can still fall from that state. He reached Sabikalpa Samadhi, and he did fall. Because, as Yogananda put it, he couldn't forget he was English. Ramana Maharshi had he had a brother who was a bit of a martinet, and whereas Brunton was willing to be the disciple of Ramana Maharshi, he didn't want to have to listen to the discipline of this stupid brother who was only Indian. And as a result, he got doubts and ego and left the ashram and fell from that consciousness. But you can. It happened to Judas. Judas was a great soul. I asked Yogananda, very interesting discussions we used to have, and he told me that he was a prophet, and I said I expressed surprise, and he said yes, he had to have been one of the 12. But then he said he was liberated in this life. I knew him. And I was fascinated when he said that. I said, what was he like? And he said he was always very much by himself. He was still a little attached to money, but not for himself. He was thinking of using it to help other people. But his brother disciples made fun of him for this money attachment. And the guru said, don't. He knew he'd suffered enough because of that attachment. But he said in this life he was liberated. Well, to be liberated after 2,000 years may seem like a long time, but sure is not. When you realize how long it is we've been coming around here. Do you know you are as old as God? I mean that quite literally, because nothing existed before or after. You just are a part of Him. You couldn't be anything but as old as God. But in the Rubayata Vomakayam, it says there, there's a passage there which Yogananda explained to mean that many souls that appeared in this day of Brahma billions of years ago are still in delusion at the end of this day of Brahma. It may even take more than one day of Brahma to get out of delusion. And you think, oh my God, she's 5 minutes late. Billions of years you've been waiting around here, wasting time. It's on a treadmill. Why is it wasting time? Why is it a treadmill? Okay, how did that one God produce this great manifestation of the universe? On the simple principle of duality. Every plus has a minus. Every up has a down. Dvaita, duality, is inherent in everything. There's male and female, there's heat and cold, there's light and darkness. Everything is opposite. And every time you experience something in one way, you're going to have to experience it in the opposite way, because this is the balance. There is no way that you can finally get it all together, because the more you go this way, the more you're going to have to go the other way. It's a simple fact of nature. I had a really funny example of this. Vidura reminded me of it the other day. We got a motorhome to tour the country many years ago, about 20 years ago or whatever. And I had always wanted a motorhome. And I laughed with absolute glee. I knew I'd have to pay for that laughter. I knew that whenever you allow yourself to go overboard emotionally in one way, you're going to have to pay for it in the other way. It's just the law. You can't get away from it. So I didn't mind. I said, okay, never mind, but I enjoy this beautiful motorhome. And I let myself go in absolute pleasure. Well, I did know that I'd have to pay, and I did pay. That very evening, I was balanced up on one knee and one foot, getting something out of a closet up above. Vidura didn't realize that the motorhome was in motion. He had it stopped, but it was not in the parking mode, and he didn't put the brake on. And it was moving so slowly that we couldn't even feel it moving, but it was in a parking lot. And he went back just to get something from the fridge, and then went back to the steering wheel. In that meantime, the motorhome hit the side of a Safeway supermarket, threw me on the floor. I broke a finger. I just lay there and laughed. I thought it was so funny. Because, this is the way it always is. Don't expect just what the delusion is that I'll finally get it together. I'll finally make my million, and then I'll have what I want. You'll never get it together. Whatever you get, it'll always be something more, something more, something more. And, when you have a plus and a minus and they cancel each other out, what have you got? Zero. Isn't it an irony to think that all these incarnations we sweat and labor and struggle and strive, all for nothing? I mean, literally nothing. In the end, there's nothing you can get. Everything gets canceled out. Every pleasure gets canceled out by a pain. Every fulfillment gets canceled out by a disillusionment. And it makes people bitterly disillusioned sometimes. But why? That's just the nature of things. What happens finally is that people decide they've had enough. And I remember I went through this because I was born with the desire to know truth. And I wanted to know what life is all about. And I was always asking, why? What is going to give people what they want? People want happiness. How are they going to find it? And I tried all sorts of ways, but I found that nothing worked. And everywhere I went, I would look for somebody who knew something. Nobody knew anything. They were all as ignorant as I was. And I just thought, well, I'll never follow anybody because everybody's just as ignorant as I am. Until I read Autobiography of a Yogi. I knew right away when I read that book, this is for me. I took the next bus from New York to Los Angeles and met Yogananda. In half an hour, he'd accepted me as a disciple. Whirlwind courtship, you might say. But I never from that moment doubted. And the most important thing I learned, which I would like to pass on to you, when you have sought in life, read this book, sought that teacher, studied this idea, followed that philosophy, and it hasn't yet satisfied, look for somebody who knows God. Look for a master. When the devotee is ready, when the disciple is ready, the guru appears. And when that comes, and when you really know, how do you know he's your guru? There's a sense of inner recognition. I know one time somebody said to me that this way wasn't the right way. I should join his church. That was the best way. I tried to show him with reason that after all, truth has many facets. You can't say you have to follow one way or have to reject other ways. It's all one. Oh, he wouldn't buy any of that. Finally, I had to say, look, you may be right. One thing we have to both agree on. Neither of us really knows what he's talking about. Only one who knows God knows. Well, I found the one who did know God, does know God. When you find something like that, don't do what Judas did. And it happens very easily. In fact, the masters will always put it to you in such a way, they are not going to tell you, this is what you've got to believe, you accept it or else. No. Rather, they'll say, don't you think? They suggest to you. They want you to come to that level. They want you to come to that understanding. And so it's not so easy. They don't, when I lived with my guru, he was completely comfortable with truth, as a result of which he never pontificated. He never said, oh, I declare. He didn't say, I prophesy. He didn't talk like that. He said, don't you think this might be so? But you found that he was always right. And I discovered that those disciples who really accepted that, they didn't go wrong. I found out I didn't fully accept. I accepted him. I didn't always accept his guidance. I accepted his guidance, yes. I didn't always accept his wisdom. This was my lack of wisdom. Sometimes I think, well, is he really right? Can he really know? There was a time, this is karmic impulses. You know, we all have these things. There was a karmic thing that came up inside me that if he had said it's raining in Los Angeles, I would have thought in my mind, the instinct would have come, I'll bet the sun's shining. Why? No reason to it. The impulse to disagree. But I squelched it. You don't have to go along with a tendency just because you see it. My reasoning mind stepped back and said, now, why are you thinking that way? But you know what won me really was not even reason. It was love. He looked into my eyes, and I felt such love. It just completely melted me. And that love was what changes you. You will never change with reason alone. You could have 1,000 doubts answered, and you'd come up with another 1,000. The reason is never satisfied. We have to understand that we are basically threefold: reason, feeling, intuition. Judas went too much by reason. He didn't go enough by love. If he had reacted to Christ's love, he could not have criticized him for that. If he had reacted with intuition, he would have understood automatically. But this tendency comes to the disciple. He gets a certain intelligence, a certain mental clarity, a certain power even. And then he thinks, well, I know. And he pits himself even against the guru. This is something I have learned, and I really, really deeply believe it. Any time I want to know whether a thing is right or wrong, I ask myself, what would my guru have said? What would my guru have done? Or, what did he say and what did he do? Because I've spent my whole life meditating on him, on his actions, on the expressions in his eyes, on so many little things. A guru teaches not with words, very little with words. I remember one time I was stranded with him, you might say. I was alone with him for the first time. I'd only been with him 2 weeks, and I was embarrassed. And he didn't seem to have any inclination to speak. And you know, you are with somebody you hardly know, and you sort of think you got to break the ice. So I fidgeted a bit, and he just sat there calmly. I said, well, sir, what does Om sound like? How do you hear it? He knew I was just trying to break the ice, wasting time, so he didn't answer. It was marvelous how he taught. He taught through consciousness. When he put me in charge of all the monks there, he didn't give me advice, counsel, sit me down and say, now, Walter, here's what you got to understand. Nothing like that. But by tuning in, I understood what he wanted. Sometimes I'd ask him, he'd give a little advice, yes. Mostly it was by consciousness. His way of teaching was by vibration, by consciousness. The more you tune in with your consciousness, the more you find yourself guided correctly. It's an amazing thing that not just the reason, but love, and not just love, but intuition, somehow in the presence of a master, you find yourself seeing things in new ways. You know, I would come to him with a list of questions. Couldn't ask a single question with him. Had no question to ask. He answered them by just being. The questions cease to exist because there's a state of consciousness where they don't arise. That is the answer you want. That's the answer Judas didn't understand yet. He was too much in the ego and too much in the thought of I and thinking reasonably. Well, he should have put it this way. He could have done it better that way. All this is, it's not the right way to approach truth. There should be, and this is something that is a basic attitude in life. I had to learn it. Many of you have got it automatically. Praise you. It's the way it should be. An openness to goodness wherever you see it. An appreciation for other people. My first inclination was to criticize. I've come to appreciate everything now, but it's taken me a while. I like to pass on what I've learned. It's worth it. You don't lose your discrimination that way, but you can appreciate even folly. You can see it isn't quite the way to do it, but you can appreciate it. You can appreciate the fact that people are so, as Yogananda put it, skillful in their ignorance. One time Yogananda was having a discussion with somebody he said to the man that you can't take literally everything in the Bible. Yep, that's what it is. Got to take it literally. He said, well, what about the Garden of Eden? You read about the serpent talking to Eve. The man said, well, in those days serpents could speak. So Yogananda, finally after this, he just took his hat off. He said, I bow to the colossal temple of ignorance I see before me. But he could respect the fact that it was so wonderfully ignorant. You can enjoy, it doesn't mean you have to say it's great, but you can enjoy the comedy of it all. And in that way, an appreciative attitude is a delight to have, to be able to appreciate somebody. If he's absolutely boring, just think now, how much boring can he get? This is really, he's setting a record. You can enjoy everything if you enjoy it with God. Now, this is the attitude when people say, Master loved mangoes, therefore I love mangoes. Master loved everything. I fell short of that at that meal in Germany, okay. Nonetheless, if we can have this thought that everything can be enjoyed, and I did enjoy that meal in my way, which is to say, I don't agree. You can enjoy everything with the joy of God, but the thing is to learn from a great master like that. Don't just put him up on a pedestal. Don't put him in a book on a shelf. Don't think, well, he lived 40, 50, 60 years ago, did all these great things, but who are we now? Make him real in your life. Make his consciousness yours right now. Think, what would he do? What would he say? When you're meditating, feel that he's meditating through you. And ask, am I meditating as well as I could? Would you like me to do something differently? He'll tell you. He will. You'll see that guidance is always there. I have found that this is my measure of perfection. What he did is the right way for me. Does it mean it's the only way? By no means. There are many ways to God, but choose one. And then when you've chosen that way, go that way. Appreciate others. I know I went to Pondicherry, founded by Sri Aurobindo. He was a great master, a wonderful soul. I just didn't feel any rapport there. I didn't feel in tune with him or with his way. Doesn't mean I don't approve. Doesn't mean I disapprove. It's just another way. It's good for those who follow it. It's not my way. Choose your way. Don't say, well, it's all one, so we'll just go every way. You'll never go that way. If you buy a car here and drive it to Reno and decide, no, you'd rather have another make of car, drive back here, exchange that for another, drive that to Reno, you can never get to New York. Take what you've got. Once you really are fixed on it as yours, make that your reference point. And using that, you will see that in all the challenges of life, this is what held me firm, was love. Yogananda's love was something not personal. It was God's love, universal love. It was something so real that when you feel it in your heart, you know that's what life's all about. What does it matter to be able to define things exactly? Far more important is to enjoy them. If your energy can always go toward Him, don't let the ego step in. Don't think that, well, now I'm pretty good. I can hang up my own shingle. I am perfectly happy just being His disciple. I have no other ambition, because I know that the best I can do to glorify my own life is just to be a channel for whatever He brought. But you know, He had the same idea. He only came to bring God. No person can define God. We have to realize that the infinite truth is what we want to bring out, and the less there is of us, the more there can be of that infinity. The expression and the lesson of Judas is a very important one for everyone. It's a lesson that you can learn, as we saw in that passage from the Gita, how easy it is to slip down by slow degrees. You think, oh, this is fun, I'll go this way for a little while. You discover it develops a certain magnetism. It's you who put the magnetism into it, but the more your thoughts feed it, those knickerbockers or whatever +4s of Bobby Jones, they become more and more an obsession with you because you put your thoughts into them. It's you who are obsessing yourself, but you've objectified that obsession, and it's become your reality. The more you get sucked into that, the more you forget everything else. And like this character in P.G. Wodehouse, you'll even give up railway lines, companies, in order to get those stupid knickerbockers. What do we really want? We want our own self. The more you can understand, don't let anything trap you into outwardness. Enjoy. Enjoy everything. Don't be bitter, disillusionment, cynical. No. Enjoy it, but with the joy of God. Know that your real joy is inside yourself, not projected outside. That when you enjoy, let's say, an ice cream cone, it's yourself enjoying. It's like a story of George Bernard Shaw, who was sitting on the outskirts of a party by himself, and the hostess came over and said, "Aren't you enjoying yourself?" And he said, "That's all I am enjoying." Well, you know, that's really all we ever enjoy. We may think we're enjoying this or that or the other thing. It's really our own self that we're enjoying. Understand that, and you can be happy wherever you go. Don't let it turn away from the real goal of life. There'll be many a temptation to draw you. Don't let it happen. Look around you a little bit at those who have done it. Not one of them has found fulfillment. Go with those humble devotees who are only interested in serving God and melting into Him. There lies your fulfillment.